Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood at the back of the crowded briefing room, her tablet clutched against her chest like a shield. The room buzzed with the usual pre-mission chatter. Officers trading jokes and complaints about the early morning call time. She had been with the 42nd Intelligence Squadron for 8 months now. Long enough to know the rhythm of these meetings, but still new enough to feel the weight of being the youngest analyst in the room. The projector hummed to life, casting a pale blue glow across the assembled faces. Colonel Davidson strode to the front, his boots clicking against the tile floor with military precision. He was a man who commanded respect without demanding it, silver hair and weathered face telling stories of decades in service. Sarah had briefed him twice before, both times on routine surveillance reports that barely warranted his attention. Today was different. Today, she had something that made her pulse quicken every time she thought about it. 3 weeks of late nights, endless coffee, and data analysis that most of her colleagues dismissed as paranoid pattern-seeking. But Sarah had seen something in the satellite imagery that everyone else had missed. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A heat signature that appeared for exactly 17 seconds every 48 hours. Movement in a supposedly abandoned industrial complex on the border of a hostile territory. Colonel Davidson's voice cut through the murmur. All right, people, let's get started. We've got the usual intel updates, logistics for Operation Sandstone. Then Mitchell has flagged something for our attention. He glanced back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was that skepticism? Curiosity? Impatience? Sarah felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Major Chen, the deputy intelligence officer, raised an eyebrow. Captain Rodriguez, who had mentored her during her first weeks, gave her an encouraging nod. But most of the faces showed the bland disinterest of people who had sat through 1,000 briefings and expected this one to be no different. She made her way to the front, her legs feeling steadier than she expected. The tablet screen glowed in her hands as she connected it to the main display. Her findings materialized on the wall behind her. A series of satellite images marked with her annotations in red. 3 weeks ago, during routine monitoring of Grid Sector 77, Echo, I noticed an anomaly in the thermal imaging of the Kravchenko industrial site. Her voice came out clear and professional, years of training overriding her nerves. As you know, this facility was decommissioned in 2019 and has been classified as abandoned since then. Someone in the third row, Lieutenant Barnes, let out a barely audible snort. Sarah knew what he was thinking. She was the analyst who saw patterns in static, the one who flagged false positives in her training exercises. She had heard the whispers in the break room, the gentle jokes about her enthusiasm outpacing her experience. She pressed on, enlarging the first thermal image. This signature appears every 48 hours, at exactly 0347 local time. It lasts for 17 seconds before disappearing completely. The temperature spike is consistent with industrial equipment, specifically the type used in manufacturing or processing. Major Chen leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. But Captain Hernandez from logistics crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. Mitchell, that could be anything. Squatters using a generator. Kids playing in an abandoned building. Hell, it could be a glitch in the satellite. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Sarah felt heat creep up her neck, but she kept her expression neutral. She had anticipated this response. I considered those possibilities, sir, which is why I cross-referenced the data with 6 different satellites over the 3-week period. The signature is consistent across all platforms. I also ran environmental analysis. The temperature and duration don't match recreational activity or basic survival heating. She switched to the next image, a high-resolution photograph taken during daylight hours. Additionally, I identified trace vehicle tracks leading to the east entrance. These tracks weren't present in imagery from 4 weeks ago. Someone is accessing this facility regularly, and they're being very careful about their timing. Colonel Davidson stood from where he'd been leaning against the wall. He moved closer to the screen, studying the images with the intensity of a man who had learned never to dismiss details. What's your assessment, Lieutenant? Sarah took a breath. This was the moment she had rehearsed in her mind 100 times. Sir, I believe this site is being used for covert operations. The timing suggests they're running equipment during a window they think is least likely to be monitored. The 17-second duration could indicate a quick production cycle or a transfer of materials. Given the facility's previous use in chemical processing and its proximity to the border, I recommend immediate surveillance escalation and possible ground verification. The room fell silent. Not the comfortable silence of people considering new information, but the heavy silence of skepticism meeting bold claims. Lieutenant Barnes leaned over to whisper something to the officer beside him. A few people shifted in their seats, exchanging glances that said they thought she was reaching, seeing threats in shadows. Then someone laughed. It started small, a suppressed chuckle from the middle of the room, but it spread like a ripple. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that comes when junior analysts get a little too excited about patterns that turn out to be nothing. The kind that said they'd all been there once, seeing conspiracies and data noise. With all due respect, Lieutenant, Captain Hernandez said, his tone not unkind, but firmly dismissive. This feels like a bit of a stretch. 17 seconds every 2 days? That's not exactly a smoking gun. It's barely a warm breeze. More laughter. Even Captain Rodriguez, who had been supportive, was smiling in a way that suggested gentle indulgence rather than agreement. Sarah felt her carefully constructed confidence beginning to crack. She looked at Colonel Davidson, hoping for some sign of support. But his expression was unreadable. His arms crossed as he continued to study the images. I understand it seems minimal, sir, Sarah said, her voice quieter now but still determined. But sometimes the smallest anomalies indicate the most sophisticated operations. If someone is trying to hide activity, they would keep it brief. They would time it for maximum stealth. This pattern is exactly what I would expect from a well-planned covert operation. Or it's a malfunction in an old building's heating system cycling on, Lieutenant Barnes said, not bothering to whisper this time. Or reflective material catching sunlight at a weird angle. Or literally 100 other explanations that don't involve international incidents. Sarah felt the moment slipping away. All those late nights, all that careful analysis, and she was losing the room. She could see it in their faces. The polite patience wearing thin, the mental dismissal already happening. They would thank her for her diligence, tell her to keep up the good work, and then forget about this briefing before lunch. Colonel Davidson straightened, preparing to speak. Sarah knew what was coming. A diplomatic thank you, a gentle reminder about the importance of proportional response to threat assessment. Maybe a suggestion to run her theories past her supervisor before bringing them to full briefings in the future. But then Major Chen spoke up, his voice cutting through the dismissive atmosphere. What was the facility's original function? Before decommission, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Chemical processing, sir. Specifically, they manufactured industrial solvents and, according to declassified reports, had contracts with the previous government for specialized materials we never fully identified. Specialized materials, Chen repeated, his eyes narrowing. And this facility just happened to be abandoned right before the regime change? Officially decommissioned 6 months before, sir. All equipment supposedly removed or destroyed per international protocols. The Major stood, moving to the screen. He studied the thermal signature with new intensity, then looked at the vehicle tracks Sarah had highlighted. Show me the access pattern again. Every instance over the 3 weeks. Sarah's fingers flew across the tablet. A timeline appeared, each thermal spike marked with precise timestamps. The pattern was undeniable once you looked for it, every 48 hours like clockwork. Always at 0347, always 17 seconds. Chen turned to face the room, his expression serious. I've seen this before. Bosnia, 2014. Small facility, brief signatures, everyone thought it was nothing. Turned out to be a weapons development site. They were running tests in short bursts to avoid detection using the same principles Mitchell just described. The laughter had stopped. People were paying attention now, leaning forward, looking at the data with fresh eyes. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest, afraid to hope but unable to stop herself. Colonel Davidson moved to stand beside Chen, studying the images with renewed focus. The room held its breath, waiting for his assessment. His next words would either validate Sarah's work or consign it to the dustbin of over-rigueur analysis. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said finally, his voice measured and careful, "compile a complete report. I want every piece of data, every cross-reference, every alternative explanation you considered and why you eliminated it. Have it on my desk by 1600 hours. "Yes, sir," Sarah managed, her voice barely steady. Davidson turned to address the room. "This briefing is now classified. Nobody discusses these findings outside this room without clearance. Chen, I want your team to pull everything we have on that facility, historical and current. Rodriguez, start drafting contingency plans for ground reconnaissance." The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Officers were taking notes, asking questions. The earlier dismissiveness replaced by the focused energy of professionals taking a potential threat seriously. Sarah answered what she could, her confidence returning with each query that treated her analysis with respect rather than amusement. As the briefing concluded and people filed out, talking in low, urgent voices, Major Chen approached her. "Good work, Lieutenant. Takes guts to stand up there when you know people are skeptical." "Thank you, sir. I couldn't ignore what the data was showing." "That's exactly the right instinct," he said. "Never let the fear of being wrong stop you from raising legitimate concerns. But Mitchell?" He lowered his voice. "You better be right about this. Because if you just convince command to dedicate resources to chasing a heating system malfunction, your career is going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with reality." He walked away, leaving Sarah alone at the front of the empty briefing room. The projector still hummed, still showed her carefully compiled evidence on the wall. She looked at those images, at the thermal signature that had consumed her thoughts for weeks, and felt the weight of what she'd just set in motion. She was either about to prove herself as an analyst worth watching, or she had just made a spectacular mistake in front of the entire command staff. There was no middle ground anymore, no quiet filing away of a theory that went nowhere. She had committed, and now everyone would be watching to see if she was brilliant or simply desperate to make a mark. Sarah gathered her tablet and headed for the door. She had 7 hours to compile that report, and it needed to be airtight. Because somewhere out there, in an abandoned facility that maybe wasn't so abandoned after all, something was happening every 48 hours for exactly 17 seconds. And now, whether she was ready for it or not, she had made it everyone's problem. Sarah's fingers ached from typing. When she finally submitted the report at 15:47 hours, 13 minutes early, a habit drilled into her during officer training. She leaned back in her desk chair, the fluorescent lights of the Intelligence Analysis Center humming above her cubicle. Around her, other analysts worked quietly, most of them still unaware of what had happened in the morning briefing. Captain Rodriguez appeared at the edge of her workspace, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He set one down on her desk with a sympathetic smile. "Heard it got intense in there this morning." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for both the caffeine and the gesture. "That's one way to describe it. I thought Colonel Davidson was going to thank me politely and move on. Then Chen backed me up and everything changed." Rodriguez settled into the empty chair at the neighboring desk, his expression thoughtful. "Chen's good people. Doesn't speak up unless he's got reason to. The Bosnia thing he mentioned, I was there for the aftermath. He's not exaggerating about how similar it looked. That's what worries me," Sarah admitted. "If I'm right, this could be serious. If I'm wrong, I just wasted everyone's time and resources based on 17 seconds of heat." "Welcome to intelligence work," Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "We're either paranoid or we're prepared, and we usually don't know which until after the fact." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her carefully. "You holding up okay? That room can be brutal when they think you're reaching." Sarah thought about the laughter, the skeptical faces, the weight of standing at the front while people dismissed her work. "I've had better mornings, but I believe the analysis is solid. I just need it to be right." Before Rodriguez could respond, her computer chimed. An encrypted email from Colonel Davidson's office. She opened it, her pulse quickening as she scanned the text. Rodriguez must have seen the change in her expression because he leaned forward. "What is it?" "They're moving forward. Ground reconnaissance team deploys at 0200 tomorrow. I'm required to attend the mission briefing at 1900 hours tonight. She looked up at Rodriguez, excitement and fear mixing in equal measure. They're actually doing this. Then you better get some rest before tonight. And Mitchell? He stood, preparing to head back to his own work. Pack a go bag. If this turns out to be what you think it is, they might want you in the operations center for real-time analysis. The next several hours passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah reviewed every piece of data again, looking for anything she might have missed. Any weakness in her analysis that could unravel under operational pressure. She compiled supplementary materials, cross-referenced historical intelligence reports, and built decision trees for what different findings might indicate. At 1845 hours, she made her way to the secure operations briefing room, a different space than the morning's meeting. This room was smaller, more intimate, with no windows and walls designed to block any electronic surveillance. The people filtering in were different too, not the broad spectrum of officers from the general briefing, but the specific team who would execute the mission. Sarah recognized some of them. Lieutenant Commander Hayes from Special Operations, a woman whose reputation preceded her, calm, under pressure, and meticulous in planning. Sergeant First Class Morrison, whose scarred hands and quiet demeanor spoke of extensive field experience. 2 other soldiers she didn't know. Young but carrying themselves with the confidence of people who had seen action, Major Chen was there, along with Colonel Davidson. And someone new, a woman in civilian clothes with sharp eyes and an ID badge that identified her as Defense Intelligence Agency. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The DIA didn't show up for false alarms. Colonel Davidson called the room to order. Thank you all for the quick turnaround. As of 1600 hours today, this operation has been classified secret. What we discuss here stays here. Clear nods around the room. Good. Lieutenant Mitchell, bring everyone up to speed on what you found. Sarah moved to the front, connecting her tablet to the display system. This time, when she showed the thermal images and explained the pattern, nobody laughed. These were professionals focused on mission parameters, not skeptics weighing her credibility. She walked them through the evidence methodically, answered technical questions from Hayes about the satellite platforms and timing windows, and provided Morrison with detailed layouts of the facility grounds. The DA woman, who introduced herself as Analyst Pearson, asked the hard questions. What's your confidence level on hostile activity versus benign explanation? Sarah had prepared for this. 70% confidence on deliberate covert activity, 30% on natural or benign causes. But within that 70%, I assess 90% probability of unauthorized use that violates decommission protocols.
Ow!
So you could be wrong about it being hostile, but you're fairly certain someone's using that facility for something they're not supposed to, Pearson clarified. Yes, ma'am. The pattern is too consistent to be accidental, too brief to be casual use, and the timing suggests operational security awareness. Pearson nodded, making notes on her tablet. That tracks with what we've been seeing in other sectors. If this is connected to what we think it might be, you just found the first thread. Sarah wanted to ask what they thought it might be, but she understood operational security. She didn't need to know the bigger picture. It's just her piece of it. The briefing continued with Hayes outlining the reconnaissance plan. The team would insert at 0200 hours, using the darkness and the gap between thermal signatures to approach undetected. They would establish observation posts with direct line of sight to the facility and maintain surveillance through the next scheduled thermal event. At 3:47, high-resolution cameras, thermal imaging, and signal intelligence equipment would capture everything. Our job is to observe and report, Hayes emphasized. This is purely reconnaissance. We do not engage unless fired upon. We do not approach the facility. We watch, we document, and we extract. Understood? Her team nodded in unison. Morrison pulled up a topographical map, marking approach routes and fallback positions. Sarah watched, fascinated and terrified by how quickly her analysis had translated into boots on the ground. Real people, real risk. All because she had noticed 17 seconds of heat every 2 days. Colonel Davidson assigned roles. Chen, you'll run the operations center here. Mitchell, you'll be attached to Chun's team for real-time analysis. If the team sees something and needs immediate context on the facility or equipment, you provide it. Pearson will coordinate with DIA headquarters and maintain the intelligence picture on our end. The briefing lasted another hour, covering communications protocols, extraction contingencies, and rules of engagement. By the time it concluded, Sarah's mind was spinning with call signs, frequency channels, and emergency procedures. She had trained for this kind of work, but simulation and reality were different beasts. As people filed out, Hayes approached her. The lieutenant commander was shorter than Sarah expected, compact and athletic with eyes that missed nothing. "You're the analyst who flagged this?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good eye. I've worked with a lot of intelligence officers who wouldn't have caught that pattern, or wouldn't have had the guts to push it up the chain." Hayes extended her hand, and Sarah shook it, noting the firm grip. "We'll get you solid confirmation one way or another. Just make sure you're available on comms when we're in position. If we see something we can't immediately identify, I need answers fast. Not in an hour after you've consulted 3 manuals. I'll be ready, ma'am." Hayes gave a slight smile. "I'm sure you will be. Try to get some sleep before 0100. It's going to be a long night." She walked away, joining her team as they headed out to prepare. Sarah found herself alone in the briefing room, except for Major Chen, who was gathering his materials. He glanced at her, reading her expression. "Having second thoughts?" "No, sir. Just thinking about what happens if I'm wrong and what happens if you're right," Chen added. "Both options are heavy, but you did your job, Mitchell. You analyzed the data, presented your findings, and let command make the decision. What happens next isn't on you alone." "Doesn't feel that way, sir. It never does," he said quietly. "I've been doing this for 23 years. And every time I send people into the field based on intelligence analysis, I feel that weight. It means you care, which makes you better at this job. But you can't let it paralyze you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Get something to eat. Review your facility data one more time, and show up at the operations center at 0100 ready to work. That's all anyone can ask." Sarah spent the next few hours in a strange limbo. She tried to eat, but barely tasted the food. She reviewed the facility schematics and historical records until she could visualize every building, every access point, every piece of equipment that had once been documented there. She called her sister just to hear a familiar voice, but couldn't tell her anything about what was happening. The conversation felt surreal, talking about ordinary things, while Sarah's mind churned with operational details. At 00 for 5 hours, she arrived at the operations center, a secure room in the basement of the intelligence building. Banks of monitors lined the walls, showing satellite feeds, communications channels, and data streams. Major Chen was already there, along with a communications specialist and 2 other analysts Sarah recognized but didn't know well. Pearson. From the DIA sat at a corner station, her own laptop open and displaying information Sarah couldn't see. The woman gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement, but said nothing, focused on her own screens. "Mitchell, Station 3, Chen directed. You'll have direct comms with the reconnaissance team and access to all relevant database systems. They're in position. You're their primary intelligence contact for facility-specific questions." Sarah settled at her assigned station, running through system checks. Her screen showed a tactical map with the facility marked in red, approach routes in yellow, and the team's current position as a blue icon that would update in real time. Another monitor displayed encrypted chat channels. Third showed streaming data from multiple intelligence platforms. "Out 200 hours. Hayes' voice came through clearly on the comm channel. "Operations, this is Recon 1. Insertion complete. Proceeding to objective." "Copy that, Recon 1, Chen replied, his voice calm and professional. "Operations Center is tracking. You're clear on all monitoring systems." Sarah watched the blue icon creep across the map, moving through terrain she had studied but never seen in person. The team moved slowly, cautiously, taking nearly 40 minutes to cover what would have been a 10-minute walk on open ground. They were ghosts, invisible even to friendly surveillance, the way they had been trained. At 0243, Hayes reported again. "Recon 1 in position, establishing observation posts. Facility is dark, no visible activity. the waiting began. Sarah monitored thermal satellites, checking for any changes in the signature pattern she'd identified. Everything remained consistent with her analysis. The facility sat cold and apparently lifeless, exactly as it should be if her theory was correct and they were between operational windows. Around her, the operations center hummed with quiet activity. Chen coordinated with other units, ensuring the airspace remained clear. Pearson maintained her mysterious connection with higher-level intelligence agencies. The communications specialist monitored multiple channels, ensuring clean signal and security. At 0330, Sarah's screen showed what she'd been waiting for: the preliminary thermal bloom, a slight temperature increase that appeared 15 minutes before the main signature. Her heart rate kicked up. Operations, this is Recon 1. We have movement. A single individual approaching from the east access point, making entry into main structure. Sarah pulled up the facility layout, marking the east entrance on her screen and pushing it to the team's displays. Recon 1, be advised that entrance leads to the former processing wing. Original equipment would have been in the sublevel. Copy, operations. Individual has entered. We're holding position. The minutes crawled. Sarah watched her clock count down to 0347 when the thermal signature should appear. Her hands were clenched so tightly her fingers hurt. Rounder. Everyone in the operations center leaned forward slightly, the tension palpable. 347 arrived. Operations, we have lights. Interior illumination visible through windows on the north side. Sublevel. Thermal signature increasing. Hayes's voice remained steady, but Sarah detected an edge of heightened alertness, standing by for the 17-second mark. Sarah counted in her head, watching the thermal data on her monitors. The signature bloomed exactly as her analysis predicted, a sharp spike in infrared radiation from the sublevel of the main building. Lights out, Hayes reported, signature decreasing. Individual exiting facility, moving back east. 17 seconds. The thermal signature faded, returning to baseline. Sarah felt simultaneously vindicated and more frightened than before. She had been right about the pattern, which meant she was probably right about everything else. Someone was using that facility for covert operations, running equipment in precise 17-second bursts. It's probably to minimize detection exactly as she had theorized. But right about what exactly? What could they be doing in 17 seconds that required this level of operational security? Recon 1, maintain observation, Chen ordered. Analysis. Sarah pulled up her notes, cross-referencing the thermal data with facility specifications. Sir, based on the heat signature intensity and duration, I estimate they're running industrial equipment, possibly centrifuges or processing machinery. 17 seconds isn't long enough for manufacturing, but could be sufficient for quality testing or small batch processing. Recon 1, did you capture imagery of the individual? Chen asked. Affirmative, operations. Sending now. A photograph appeared on Sarah's screen, grainy from the night vision equipment but clear enough. A man in his 40s or 50s, wearing work clothes and carrying what looked like a secured case. Not military uniform, not obviously threatening, just someone who looked like he belonged at an industrial site. Pearson stood up from her station, moving to look at Chen's screen, which displayed the same image. Sarah saw the DIA analyst's expression change, a flicker of recognition followed by something that might have been concerned. Pearson pulled out her phone, stepped away from the main stations, and made a quiet call that Sarah couldn't hear. When Pearson returned, she spoke directly to Chen. We need to maintain surveillance through the next cycle. 2 days from now, same time. I need to see if it's the same individual or if there are multiple operators. Chen nodded. Duh. Recon 1, you're going to be out there a while. Settle in for extended observation. We'll rotate support as needed. Copy that. Operations. We're prepared for 48-hour deployment. The night stretched on. Hayes and her team maintained their invisible presence near the facility, sending periodic updates that confirmed nothing else was happening. At 0600, as dawn broke over the operational area, where Sarah was released from the operations center to get rest before the next shift. She stumbled back to her quarters, exhausted but too wired to sleep immediately. Her mind replayed the night, the confirmation of her analysis, the growing certainty that they had stumbled onto something significant. Pearson's reaction to that photograph bothered her. The DA analyst had recognized something, known something, but hadn't shared it with the room. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Captain Rodriguez. Heard the surveillance was productive. Good work. Get some sleep. You earned it. She smiled despite her exhaustion. 3 days ago, people had laughed at her analysis. Now they were calling it good work. Sarah woke to her alarm at 1400 hours, groggy and disoriented. She had managed only 5 hours of sleep, her dreams filled with thermal signatures and ticking clocks. After a quick shower and change into fresh uniform, she headed to the Intelligence Center cafeteria for food that actually registered taste this time. Lieutenant Barnes sat at a corner table, and when he spotted her, he waved her over. Sarah hesitated, remembering his skeptical comments from the initial briefing, but curiosity won out. She grabbed her tray and joined him. Heard your facility turned out to be active after all, Barnes said, and to Sarah's surprise, there was no mockery in his tone. Chen briefed some of us this morning on general terms. Sounds like you were onto something. We confirmed activity, Sarah said carefully, aware of classification restrictions. Still analyzing what it means. Barnes nodded, pushing food around his plate. Look, I owe you an apology for the other day. The snort, the skepticism. I wasn't taking your analysis seriously. That was unprofessional. Sarah blinked, not expecting this. You were doing what any analyst should do, questioning assumptions and looking for simpler explanations. Maybe, Barnes conceded, but there's a difference between healthy skepticism and dismissiveness. I was leaning toward the latter. You stuck to your analysis when it would have been easier to back down, and that takes guts. He met her eyes. So, sorry. And good work. Thank you, Sarah said, genuinely touched. That means a lot. They talked for a few more minutes about general intelligence work, the challenges of pattern recognition, and the fine line between finding legitimate threats and seeing conspiracy and coincidence. When Sarah left to head back to the operations center, she felt lighter somehow. Being right was satisfying. But having her work respected by peers was something else entirely. The operations center hummed with afternoon activity. When she arrived at 1500 hours, Major Chen looked like he hadn't slept, still wearing the same uniform from the night before, his eyes rimmed with red but sharp with focus. Several new faces had joined the team, including a senior analyst Sarah recognized from counterintelligence, and a technical specialist whose name badge identified him as belonging to an agency whose acronym she didn't recognize. Mitchell. Good, you're here, Chen said. We need your assessment on something. Conference room 2, 5 minutes. Sarah quickly checked her station, reviewing the updates from Hayes' team. The reconnaissance unit had maintained position throughout the day, documenting routine lack of activity at the facility. No visitors, no movement, nothing that would draw attention to the site. To any casual observer, it was exactly what it claimed to be, an abandoned industrial complex slowly decaying in obscurity. In the conference room, she found Colonel Davidson, Major Chen, Analyst Pearson, and 2 officers she didn't know, both wearing insignia that marked them as intelligence liaisons from other branches. The atmosphere was tense, focused. Davidson gestured for her to sit. Lieutenant, what I'm about to share is classified top secret. You'll need to sign additional non-disclosure paperwork after this meeting, clear? Yes, sir. Pearson stood, connecting her laptop to the room's display. A photograph appeared, the same image of the man Hayes' team had captured entering the facility. We've identified this individual. His name is Viktor Petrov, a chemical engineer who officially retired 8 years ago. Unofficially, he's been linked to several entities of concern in the region, though never with enough evidence to act on. Another image appeared, this one showing Petrov standing with other men in what looked like a laboratory setting. This photograph was taken 4 years ago at a facility we later confirmed was developing chemical agents in violation of international treaties. Petrov isn't just some engineer. He's a specialist in rapid synthesis processes and covert production methods. Sarah felt her stomach sink. Chemical weapons. The facility's original function. The brief operational windows, the careful timing. It all clicked into a darker picture. We believe, Pearson continued, that Petrov is using the 17-second windows to test production equipment. Not to manufacture weapons-grade materials in those moments, but to verify that the equipment functions correctly and produces the expected results. The actual production probably happens during longer sessions that we haven't detected yet, possibly in different locations. One of the unknown officers, a Navy commander, leaned forward. The question is whether this is an isolated operation or part of a larger network. If Petrov is testing equipment here, where is the actual production happening? And who's funding it? That's why we need to maintain surveillance through the next cycle, Chen said. We need to see if Petrov returns, if he's alone, if anyone else is involved. We need more data before we can determine the scope of this operation. Davidson turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, you found this facility by noticing a pattern in thermal signatures. I need you to expand your search. Look at other decommissioned facilities in the region, other sites with similar industrial history. See if there are comparable patterns anywhere else. If this is a network, there might be other locations using the same operational security procedures. Sarah felt the weight of the assignment settle on her shoulders. Yes, sir. How wide should I cast the search parameters? Start with a 500-kilometer radius from the current facility, Pearson suggested. Focus on sites that were decommissioned in the past 10 years and had chemical processing capabilities. Also look for facilities that might have been repurposed, officially or otherwise. I'll need access to restricted databases, Sarah said, her mind already organizing the search parameters. Some of the facility records are classified above my current clearance. Granted, Davidson said simply. Pearson will coordinate the clearance upgrades. You'll have access by 1600 hours. I want preliminary results by tomorrow morning. The meeting continued with operational details, discussing contingency plans if Petrov's next visit revealed something requiring immediate action. Sarah took notes, asked clarifying questions, and tried to ignore the growing realization that her 17-second thermal signature had opened a door into something much larger and more dangerous than she had initially imagined. When the meeting concluded, she returned to her station and dove into the expanded search. The newly granted access opened databases she had never seen before. Intelligence reports from multiple agencies, surveillance data going back decades. She built search algorithms, filtered results, and cross-referenced thermal patterns with facility histories. Hours blurred together. She grabbed coffee from the operations center's machine, barely tasting it. Around her, other analysts worked their own angles, building pieces of a puzzle that was still too fragmented to see clearly. Major Chen periodically checked on her progress, offering guidance when she hit dead ends, and redirecting her search when she went down unproductive paths. At 2,300 hours, her screen flagged a match. Another facility, this one 320 kilometers northeast of Petrov's site. Decommissioned 9 years ago, formerly a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. And in the thermal data from the past month, there it was. A brief signature, appearing every 72 hours, lasting exactly 13 seconds. Sarah's pulse quickened. She ran the same verification protocols she had used on the first facility, checking multiple satellites, eliminating natural causes, confirming the pattern's consistency. The signature was real. Someone was using that facility too. She pulled up historical records on the pharmaceutical plant. Unlike the chemical processing facility, this one hadn't been flagged as sensitive in any intelligence reports. It had closed due to economic factors, not regulatory concerns, which made it perfect for covert operations, a site that wouldn't draw automatic scrutiny. Major Chen, Sarah called across the operations center. I've got another one. Chen was at her station in seconds, studying her findings. His expression grew more serious as he reviewed the data. 13 seconds? 72-hour intervals? Different pattern, but same concept. Run facial recognition on any satellite imagery of that site for the past 3 months. Let's see if Petrov or anyone associated with him shows up. Sarah set the search running, watching algorithms scan through weeks of accumulated imagery. The process would take hours, but it was necessary. If they could connect Petrov to multiple facilities, it would confirm the network theory and justify more aggressive action. At 0145 hours, Hayes's voice crackled over the comm system. Operations, this is Recon 1. We're approaching the next scheduled thermal event. All personnel in position? Sarah abandoned her facial recognition search to focus on the live operation. Her monitors showed the tactical situation, Hayes's team maintaining observation positions. Satellite coverage confirming no other activity in the area. Communications channels clear and encrypted. The facility sat dark and silent. The night was colder than 2 days ago. A weather front having moved through the region, but conditions were acceptable for the operation. Sarah pulled up weather data, noting that the temperature drop might actually help identify thermal signatures more clearly. At 0347, movement appeared on the team's night vision cameras. Operations? We have 2 individuals approaching from the east. One matches Petrov from previous observation. Second individual is unknown. Male, approximately 30 years old, carrying equipment cases. Sarah's heart rate elevated. 2 people meant this wasn't just Petrov running solo tests. This was coordinated, organized, multiple people involved in the operation. The 2 men entered the facility through the same east access point. Hayes's team adjusted positions to get better camera angles, their movements invisible and professional. Lights on, Hayes reported. Both individuals visible and sublevel. They're setting up equipment on what looks like a workbench. Sarah pulled up the facility blueprints, highlighting the sublevel layout and pushing it to the team's displays. Recon 1. That section was originally used for quality control testing. Isolated from main production areas, good ventilation systems, sealed environment. Copy that. Standing by for thermal event. Sarah watched her clock. 034645. 15 seconds until the pattern should trigger. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to capture every detail. PP's Y. Thermal signature active, Hayes reported. Equipment is running. I'm seeing looks like a centrifuge or a separator of some kind. Both individuals monitoring closely. Sarah zoomed in on the thermal data, analyzing the heat patterns characteristics. The signature was more intense than previous cycles. It's probably because they were running a more substantial test with multiple people present. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. Equipment shutting down, Hayes said. Both individuals examining results. Younger male is taking samples, placing them in secured containers. The thermal signature began to fade, returning to baseline just as Sarah's analysis had predicted. But something was wrong. The pattern had held, but the men weren't leaving. Through the night vision cameras, Sarah could see them in the sublevel, still working, still moving around the equipment. They're staying, Sarah said aloud, her mind racing. The pattern always showed them leaving immediately after. Why are they staying? Chen leaned over her station, watching the same feeds. Maybe because this time they got the results they needed. Maybe this was the final test. Pearson appeared beside them, her face grim. Or maybe they know we're watching and this is a message. Sarah felt ice in her stomach. Could they have detected the surveillance? Had Hayes's team been compromised somehow? Recon 1, maintain position and observe, Chen ordered, his voice steady despite the sudden uncertainty. Do not engage. Report any change in behavior. For 20 minutes, Petrov and his companion worked in the sublevel. Sarah watched, documenting everything, trying to understand what they were doing. The younger man appeared to be packing equipment, carefully stowing components in cases. Petrov was cleaning the workspace, methodically wiping down surfaces. They were concluding operations. This wasn't just a test cycle, it was a wrap-up. Operations. Both individuals are preparing to leave, Hayes reported. There. Wait. The younger male just received a phone call. He's talking. Looks urgent. Petrov has stopped packing. Sarah watched the infrared imagery, seeing the heat signatures of both men shift as they changed their body language. Something was happening, some communication that was changing their plans. Both individuals are now rapidly packing. They're moving fast operations. This looks like emergency extraction. Do they know we're here? Chen asked, his question directed at no one in particular. Impossible, one of the communications specialists said. We're running full MCON, No emissions, no possible detection. But the men's behavior suggested otherwise. Within 5 minutes, they had gathered all their equipment and exited the facility. Instead of the casual departure pattern from the first observation, they moved quickly, purposefully, like people who knew they needed to disappear. Hayes kept her team in position. Cameras tracking the two men as they reached a vehicle parked in the shadows 200 meters from the facility. The car, a nondescript sedan, pulled away with no lights, navigating by moonlight until it reached the main road. Operations subjects are mobile and departing the area. Request guidance on pursuit. Chen looked at Colonel Davidson, who had appeared in the operations center during the past few minutes. The colonel's expression was thoughtful, calculating risks and benefits. Negative on pursuit, Recon 1, Davidson ordered. Maintain position at the facility. I want that sublevel examined once you confirm the area is clear. Document everything they left behind. Copy that. Operations. Standing by, Operations Center erupted into controlled chaos. Pearson was on her phone again, reporting to her superiors at the DIA. Chen coordinated with Signals Intelligence to track the departing vehicle. Sarah pulled up every database entry on the pharmaceutical facility, cross-referencing it with Petrov's known associates and movements. Her facial recognition search pinged completion. She pulled up the results, scanning through the matches. There in imagery from 3 weeks ago, Petrov visiting the pharmaceutical facility. And 2 weeks before that, the same younger male they had just observed. The facilities were connected. This was absolutely a network. But the emergency extraction bothered her. If they didn't know about the surveillance, what had prompted such an urgent departure? Was it scheduled? Or had something else spooked them? At 0445, Hayes reported again. Operations, we're clear to approach the facility. Area is secure. Moving in for examination? The next hour was tense. Hayes's team carefully entered the sublevel, documenting the workspace with high-resolution photographs and chemical sensors. They found traces of compounds that suggested the team's worst fears were correct. This wasn't just equipment testing. It was production capability verification for chemical agents. Sarah compiled the evidence, building a comprehensive intelligence picture from the surveillance, the thermal analysis, the facility connections, and now the physical evidence Hayes was collecting. By the time dawn broke over the operational area, they had enough to confirm that Petrov wasn't just testing equipment. He was preparing for something larger. The emergency briefing began at 0700 hours. Convened in the same secure room where Sarah had first presented her findings. But the atmosphere now was completely different. No skepticism, no dismissive laughter, just grim-faced officers and analysts processing the implications of what Hayes's team had discovered in that. Sub-level. Colonel Davidson stood at the front, his exhaustion visible, but his command presence unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, we have confirmation of chemical weapons development infrastructure. The compound traces recovered from the facility match precursors for nerve agents. This is no longer a surveillance operation. This is a potential international incident. Images from Hayes's documentation appeared on the screen. The workbench carefully wiped down but still showing chemical residue. The ventilation system, modified beyond its original specifications. Equipment markings that matched manufacturers known to supply entities violating weapons treaties. The question before us, Davison continued, is whether we're looking at active production or capability establishment. Is Petrov manufacturing weapons-grade materials, or is he setting up the infrastructure to do so in the future? Analyst Pearson stood, her laptop connected to the display. Based on what DIA has been tracking, we believe this is preparatory work. Petrov and his network are establishing multiple production sites, testing equipment, verifying processes. The actual manufacturing would happen later, probably triggered by some external event or requirement. Sarah raised her hand, waiting for acknowledgement before speaking. Sir, if I may. The second facility I identified, the pharmaceutical plant, shows a different timing pattern. 72 hours instead of 48. Could that indicate different stages of the same process? Maybe one facility handles one component, while another handles something else? Chen nodded. That's consistent with compartmentalized production. It's a standard security measure for covert weapons programs. No single facility has everything needed to produce a complete weapon, which makes detection harder and reduces risk if one site is compromised. A Navy intelligence officer Sarah hadn't met spoke up. We need to expand the search globally. If Mitchell found 2 facilities using these patterns, there could be others we haven't identified yet. We need to map the entire network before we take action. Agreed, Davidson said. Mitchell, I'm assigning you a team. For analysts, full database access, priority tasking. I want every facility in that region scanned for similar thermal patterns. Cast the net wide, then narrow down based on facility history and capabilities. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper. Yes, sir. How much time do we have? Unknown, Davidson admitted. Petrov's emergency extraction suggests something accelerated his timeline. He might be going to ground, or he might be moving to activate phase. We need answers faster than the normal intelligence cycle allows. The briefing continued with operational planning. Hayes's reconnaissance team would rotate out after 48 hours in position, replaced by a fresh unit that would maintain surveillance. Signals intelligence would attempt to track Petrov's communications and movements. Diplomatic channels were being quietly opened with allied intelligence services to share information and coordinate potential responses. Sarah left the briefing with her head spinning. The casual analysis work she'd been doing just days ago now transformed into a race against an unknown deadline. She found Captain Rodriguez waiting outside the briefing room, concern evident on his face. They're putting a lot on your shoulders, he said quietly. I found the thread, Sarah replied. Now, I need to see where it leads. Just remember you're not alone in this. You've got a team now. Use them. And Mitchell. Rodriguez's expression was serious. Be prepared for what might come next. If this escalates beyond intelligence gathering, decisions are going to be made that are above our pay grades. But they'll be based on the information you provide. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying directly. Military action, diplomatic interventions. Consequences that rippled far beyond a single analyst noticing a pattern in thermal data. I'll do my job, sir. That's all I can control. Rodriguez nodded, satisfied with her answer. Good. Now go get your team organized. You've got work to do. The next 72 hours blurred into an exhausting cycle of analysis, briefings, and discovery. Sarah's newly assigned team proved exceptional for experienced analysts who took her methodology and ran with it. They scanned hundreds of facilities, filtered thousands of data points, and identified 6 more sites showing similar thermal patterns. Each discovery added pieces to the puzzle. A former textile factory showing brief thermal events every 96 hours. An abandoned warehouse with irregular but consistent signatures. A supposedly closed research facility with activity that perfectly matched the operational security protocols Petrov's network was using. Major Chen coordinated surveillance operations on the highest priority sites, deploying reconnaissance teams and technical collection platforms. Each facility confirmed the pattern. Brief operational windows. Careful timing, evidence of chemical processing equipment being tested or calibrated. But Petrov himself had vanished. After his emergency departure from the original facility, he had disappeared from all tracked communications and surveillance systems. His known associates were being monitored, but none of them showed unusual activity. It was as if he had anticipated exposure and executed a pre-planned escape protocol. On the 4th day after the initial briefing, Sarah was reviewing thermal data at 0300 hours, her eyes burning from fatigue and screen glare, when something caught her attention. Not a pattern in the facility data, but in the timing. She pulled up all the confirmed sites, mapping their operational schedules on a single timeline. 48 hours. 72 hours? 96 hours. The intervals weren't random. They were mathematical progressions. And when she mapped them against a calendar, they all converged on a single date, 18 days from now. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she built the visualization, showing how each facility's testing cycle aligned to reach peak readiness at the same moment. It was elegant and terrifying, a distributed network designed to mature simultaneously, ready for coordinated activation. Major Chen, she called out, her voice cutting through the operations center's quiet hum. "I need you to see this." Chen was at her station within seconds, and Sarah watched his expression change as he processed the timeline. They're synchronizing. Every facility, different intervals, all pointing to the same culmination date. Which means that's when they plan to move from testing to actual production, Sarah concluded. 18 days. That's how long we have to figure out what they're planning and stop it. Chen immediately called for Colonel Davidson and Analyst Pearson. Within minutes, they were studying Sarah's timeline analysis, verifying her calculations, testing her assumptions. But the data was solid. 18 days until Petrov's network would be fully operational and capable of producing chemical weapons on a scale. That made everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. Davidson's face was grave. "This goes above our level. We need to brief the National Security Council. This is a decision point for National Command Authority." The next week transformed Sarah's life completely. She was pulled into high-level briefings, explaining her analysis to generals and civilian intelligence directors. Her timeline became the foundation for an entire operational plan. Military units preparing for potential interdiction, diplomatic channels opening to coordinate with international partners. The skeptical faces from that first briefing room were gone, replaced by intense focus and respect. Lieutenant Barnes apologized again, more seriously this time, acknowledging that his initial dismissal could have cost them weeks of critical preparation time. Other analysts sought her out for technical advice, wanting to understand her methodology and apply it to their own work. But Sarah barely had time to process the change in her status. She was working 18-hour days, running her team, refining the intelligence picture, and responding to a constant stream of questions from operational planners. The 17-second thermal signature had become a window into a threat that crossed borders and tested international security frameworks. On day 12, intelligence services from 3 allied nations confirmed they had been tracking similar activities in their regions. Petrov's network wasn't limited to one country, it was truly international, suggesting backing from a sophisticated organization with significant resources. The scale of what they were facing grew clearer and more frightening with each new piece of information. Hayes led a raid on the pharmaceutical facility on day 14, carefully coordinated operation that captured equipment and documentation before Petrov's people could destroy it. The evidence confirmed weapons-grade production capabilities and revealed shipping routes that suggested the finished products were meant for terrorist organizations. Sarah watched the raid from the operations center, her timeline analysis having provided the optimal window for intervention. When Hayes reported mission success with no casualties and significant intelligence haul, Sarah felt something release in her chest. A tension she'd been carrying since that first briefing when people laughed at her 17-second anomaly. Colonel Davidson appeared beside her station as the operation concluded. "Walk with me, Lieutenant." They left the operations center, moving through quiet corridors until they reached an outdoor area where they could speak privately. The morning air was cold and clean, a sharp contrast to the recycled atmosphere of the operations center. "You did exceptional work," Davidson said simply. "The kind of analysis that prevents disasters, rather than just responding to them. That's the highest form of intelligence work."
"Thank you, sir."
I saw the pattern and couldn't ignore it." "That's what makes you good at this," Davidson said. "But I need you to understand something, Mitchell. The next few days are going to be intense. We have 6 days until that convergence date, and there are still facilities we haven't located. Military operations are being planned against confirmed sites, but Petrov is still in the wind." "This isn't over, I know, sir. I'm recommending you for a commendation and a promotion," Davidson continued. "But more importantly, I'm recommending you for assignment to a special task force we're establishing, focused specifically on detecting this type of covert infrastructure development before it reaches operational status. We need analysts who can see what others miss." Sarah looked at the colonel, seeing respect in his eyes that hadn't been there when she was just another junior analyst flagging possible false positives. "I'd be honored, sir. We'll still work under Chen, but you'll have more autonomy, bigger team, access to resources most analysts never see. It's demanding work, and the threats won't always be this clear once you identify them. Are you ready for that?" Sarah thought about the briefing room laughter, about standing in front of skeptical faces and holding to her analysis despite doubt. She thought about the 72 hours she'd spent, sure she was wrong before the surveillance confirmed her theory. She thought about what could have happened if she'd backed down, if she'd let the skepticism erode her confidence. Yes, sir. I'm ready. Over the final 6 days, the international coalition moved against Petrov's network with coordinated precision. Facilities were raided simultaneously across 4 countries. Equipment was seized, documents recovered, 13 individuals arrested, including Petrov himself, captured trying to cross a border with falsified documentation. The pharmaceutical plant Sarah had identified yielded the most significant intelligence. A complete production manual that revealed Petrov's network had been just days away from manufacturing weapons-grade nerve agents. The convergence date in Sarah's timeline matched the scheduled beginning of production, confirming that her analysis had been accurate down to the day. Major news outlets reported on a successful international operation against chemical weapons proliferation, but the details remained classified. The public would never know about 17-second thermal signatures, or the junior analyst who noticed what everyone else had missed. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life settled into a new rhythm. Her promotion came through, along with assignment to Davidson's special task force. She kept her team, expanded it actually, began developing new methodologies for detecting covert infrastructure development. Lieutenant Barnes joined her team at his own request. His earlier skepticism transformed into respect and a genuine desire to learn her analytical approach. Captain Rodriguez became a regular mentor, helping her navigate the politics of increased visibility and responsibility. 3 months after that first briefing, Sarah found herself back in the same room where people had laughed at her findings. This time, she was training a new group of analysts, teaching them about pattern recognition and the importance of pursuing analysis even when it seemed improbable. The hardest part, she told them, isn't finding the pattern. It's having the courage to speak up when you do, especially when you know people might dismiss you. But our job isn't to be popular or to avoid looking foolish. Our job is to see threats before they materialize and give our leadership the information they need to act. She pulled up that original thermal image, the 17-second signature that had started everything. This is what changed my career. Not because I was smarter than anyone else or had better tools, but because I trusted my analysis and refused to let skepticism, including my own, stop me from raising the flag. A young analyst in the back raised his hand. What if you had been wrong? What if it had just been a malfunction or something benign? Sarah smiled, remembering her own fear of that exact outcome. Then, I would have learned something valuable about false positives and refined my methodology, but I would have known I did my job correctly. I analyzed the data, presented my findings, and let command make the decision. That's all we can ever do. She looked around the room at the attentive faces, seeing herself 3 months ago in their expressions. Some skeptical, some eager, all of them trying to figure out how to be good at an impossible job. Trust your analysis, she said. Check it, verify it, test it against alternative explanations. But if you genuinely believe you found something, speak up. The worst-case scenario isn't looking foolish in a briefing room. The worst case is staying silent and letting a threat develop because you were afraid of being wrong. As the training session concluded and the analysts filed out, Major Chen appeared at the doorway. Good session. You're a natural instructor. Thank you, sir. Still getting used to being on this side of the briefing. You earned it, Chen said. By the way, we've got something new. Anomalous signal pattern in Eastern Europe, brief and rhythmic. Thought you might want to take a look. Sarah felt the familiar pull of curiosity, the analytical mind seeking patterns in chaos. She followed Chen back to the operations center, ready to dive into the next puzzle. The next potential threat hidden in data that most people would overlook. Somewhere in the world, something was happening in brief, carefully timed windows. Equipment running, tests being conducted, capabilities being developed in the shadows. And now, there was an analyst who knew how to look for those shadows, who understood that 17 seconds of heat could mean everything. The briefing room had laughed, but Sarah Mitchell had been right. And the world was safer because she had trusted her analysis and spoken up despite the skepticism. That was the real story, not of someone who was never wrong, but of someone who was willing to be wrong in pursuit of being right when it mattered most. As she settled at her workstation and pulled up the new signal data, Sarah smiled slightly. Another pattern waiting to be understood. Another chance to see what others missed. Another opportunity to do the job she'd discovered she was born to do. The operations center hummed around her, analysts working their cases. Threats being identified and countered, the endless vigilance that kept disasters from becoming headlines. And in her corner of that vast machinery of intelligence and defense, Sarah Mitchell began to analyze the new anomaly, looking for the pattern that would tell her whether this was something or nothing. Because now she knew that sometimes the smallest signals meant the most, and she would never stop looking for them.